"The only thing you're good for tonight, Nora, is standing near the flowers, so people think we paid for a decorator." Diane said it the way she said most things, lightly, like it was a joke, like Nora was supposed to laugh along. Her champagne flute caught the light from the chandeliers above the Carrington ballroom, and she tilted it slightly in Nora's direction. A little toast to nothing. Nora didn't laugh. She stood at the edge of the reception table in her second-hand navy dress, the seams letting out at the sides because she'd gained 12 pounds since she bought it 2 winters ago, and she watched her sister float back into the crowd. Diane moved through rooms the way expensive perfume did. Everyone noticed. Everyone made space. Nora reached for a glass of water. The Carrington was one of those old hotels in downtown Toronto that had been renovated twice but still smelled faintly of the 1940s. Wood polish, cigarette ghosts, and money so old it had stopped trying to impress anyone. Their father had booked it for Diane's engagement party 3 months before the wedding, which was also 3 months before he'd come to Nora quietly and told her he'd borrowed from people he shouldn't have. She hadn't asked how much. She already knew it was the kind of number that didn't get said out loud. So she'd come tonight, put on the dress, taken the train from her apartment in Scarborough because parking downtown on a Saturday cost more than she made in 2 hours. She'd told herself she was here for her father. She was still telling herself that when Diane made the decorator comment in front of 4 of her future in-laws, the band was doing something soft and forgettable near the far windows. Tables had little cards with calligraphy Nora recognized because she'd addressed 240 of them herself, crouched over her kitchen table for an entire Sunday, her wrist cramping, Diane on the phone in the next room correcting her on the spelling of someone's hyphenated last name. She set her water glass down and picked up a shrimp from the appetizer tray, and that was when she felt it. The room changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was more like the way a room changes when a window gets opened in winter. A shift in pressure, a drop in temperature, something that makes the back of your neck go still before your brain catches up. She turned toward the entrance. He came in without an announcement. No one introduced him. He didn't need it. The space around him adjusted automatically. The way water adjusts around something dropped into it. 2 men flanked him, both in dark coats, both watching the room with the kind of eyes that were cataloging exits. But she wasn't looking at them. He was maybe 40, maybe a little past it, tall enough that he had to angle his shoulders slightly coming through the door frame, though she wasn't sure if she imagined that. Dark suit, no tie. A jaw that looked like it had been broken at least once and set by someone in a hurry. His hair was pushed back from his face, and there were threads of grey in it at the temples that he clearly hadn't bothered to address. He moved like a man who had stopped caring about whether his entrance was graceful somewhere around his 30th birthday. He scanned the room. She looked away. She looked back. He was still scanning. "That's Callum Voss," said a voice beside her. Nora turned, one of Diane's friends. Priya, she thought. The one who worked in finance was standing near the appetizer table with her phone face down and her eyebrows up. "Voss," Nora said. "His family runs half the port logistics in the Great Lakes. The other half he apparently just acquired last spring." Priya tilted her champagne almost imperceptibly in his direction. "My firm did some due diligence for a client looking at one of his properties. Nobody could figure out where the money actually came from. The file just sort of stopped making sense after a certain point." Nora looked at him again. He had found who he was looking for. He was shaking hands with someone near the bar, one of her future brother-in-law's business associates, she thought, an older man she'd been introduced to and immediately forgotten. The handshake lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and no longer. Then he turned, and his eyes landed on her. Not Diane, not the room, her. Nora looked down at her shrimp. She set it back on the tray and picked up her water again and studied the ice cubes like they were going to tell her something useful. Her heart was doing something that wasn't quite alarming, but wasn't quite comfortable either. He crossed the room, not quickly. He wasn't the kind of man who moved quickly toward anything. She understood that immediately, the same way you understand certain things about weather by the smell of the air. He moved like someone who had decided to do something and was simply doing it, without urgency, without doubt. He stopped beside her. "You've been running the numbers on this event," he said, not a question. She looked up. He was closer than she'd expected. She could see a thin scar along his jaw, faint and old, and the fact that his eyes were very dark and very calm, and were currently directed entirely at her. "Excuse me," she said. "The seating chart. The vendor invoices, the RSVPs." He reached past her for the water pitcher on the table. Not a glass, the pitcher, and poured himself a glass with the unhurried ease of someone who had never once in his life worried about whether he was being presumptuous. Someone did the administrative work on this event, and it wasn't the woman in the green dress who's been accepting compliments for it all evening. Nora stared at him. "You have shrimp sauce on your wrist," he added. She looked down. She did. She grabbed a cocktail napkin, and her face did something she couldn't fully control, and she heard herself say, "Are you always like this when you introduce yourself? Or am I getting a special version?" Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one, maybe. The memory of what one used to feel like. "Callum Voss," he said. "Nora Callahan." She balled up the napkin, "and I didn't run the numbers on the event. I addressed the envelopes and built the seating chart in Excel and called 3 caterers to price match because the first one was billing per shrimp, apparently. And the venue deposit?" She looked at him properly. "What about it?" she said. "The Carrington charges a 20% surcharge for Saturday bookings in November. Your father negotiated it down to 12. He set his glass down. "I know because the person who owns this hotel owes me a favor, and that favor has a paper trail, and your father's name is on a related document I reviewed this past Monday." The noise of the room felt very far away. "What kind of document?" Nora said. He looked at her steadily. He didn't seem to find her alarming, which she found slightly alarming. "The kind that explains why your father has been losing weight since August," he said, "and why you took a second job in September." She had. Data entry. Remote $11 an hour over what her bookkeeping clients paid, logged between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. on the nights she didn't have early morning invoicing to finish. She hadn't told anyone. She hadn't thought anyone had noticed. "Who are you?" she said. Not the name. She knew the name now. "Someone your father borrowed from," Voss said, "and someone who has recently discovered that the man I entrusted the terms to has been moving numbers around in ways that don't add up." He studied her face. "Which is a problem. Because I'm running an operation that generates a significant amount of revenue that needs to go somewhere, and the person responsible for making it go somewhere has apparently been taking a percentage of the going." "That's embezzlement," Nora said. "Yes," he said, "and you're telling me this because you built a 40-table seating chart for 260 guests in a format that cross-referenced dietary restrictions against table proximity to the kitchen and flagged 3 conflicts before anyone asked you to." He reached into his jacket and set a card on the table beside her water glass. It had a phone number on it and nothing else. And because your father's debt doesn't disappear, it transfers. The band shifted into something slower. Across the room, Diane was laughing at something, her head thrown back, her ring catching light from 6 different directions. "You want me to look at your books," Nora said. "I want you to find what my accountant has been hiding," Voss said. "There's a difference." She picked up the card. It was heavier than a card should be. Thick stock, the kind of paper that was a quiet statement about how someone spent money without spending it loudly. "And if I say no," she said, "then your father's debt stays where it is," he said, "and you keep working until 1 in the morning." It wasn't a threat the way he said it. It was more like a fact being laid on a table for inspection. "Here is the situation. Here are the variables. What do you want to do with them?" She should have said no. She knew she should have said no. She'd been saying no to bad situations her entire life. No to the boyfriend who borrowed money and stopped returning calls. No to the client who paid late and expected gratitude. No to her mother's voice in her head saying, "Just be easier, Nora, just make things easier." She put the card in her dress pocket. which was small and practical and had been one of the reasons she'd bought the dress in the first place. "I want the full ledger access," she said. "Not summaries, not exports, the actual source files." "Obviously," he said. "And I need to know the scope. Revenue streams, outgoing accounts. The time period we're looking at, 3 years," he said. 14 accounts. 2 shell companies you're not going to like." "I never like shell companies," Nora said. "No one does," he said. "That's rather the point of them." He reached for his water glass, finished it, set it down. Then he looked at her. Really looked, the way people mostly didn't bother, the way she'd stopped expecting. And something his face did a thing she couldn't name, not softening, not quite. More like recognition, like he'd been looking for something in the ledger of the room all evening and had just found the column that balanced. "Monday," he said, 7 a.m. "The address will come from that number." He walked back across the room without looking back. Nora stood there with the card in her pocket, and the noise of the party coming back in stages, volume by volume, like someone turning a dial. Diane appeared at her elbow 30 seconds later, eyes bright, following where Nora's gaze had gone. "Was that Callum Voss talking to you?" she said, and the word "you" had a particular shape in her mouth, the kind of shape that was a question inside a question. "He mistook me for someone else," Nora said, and went to find another glass of water. The office was on King Street West, in a building that looked like a law firm and operated nothing like one. She arrived at 6:58 because she was constitutionally incapable of being late to anything. And a man in the lobby checked her name against a list on a tablet and rode the elevator with her to the 14th floor without speaking. The 14th floor was quiet in the specific way that expensive, serious rooms are quiet. Carpet that absorbed footsteps, windows that were double-glazed against the city noise, a complete absence of the buzzing fluorescent overhead lighting she'd worked under for most of her adult life. She was shown to a room with a desk, 2 monitors, a laptop already open, and a filing cabinet that had been unlocked. There was a cup of coffee waiting, black, which she hadn't asked for, and which was exactly what she would have asked for. She sat down. She opened the laptop. Voss walked in 12 minutes later, set a folder on the corner of the desk, and looked at the screen. "You've already found something," he said. She had. She'd been in the files for 11 minutes. "Your accountant has been running 2 sets of depreciation calculations for the same equipment lease," she said. "This one," she pointed, "goes into your consolidated report. This one gets routed through your secondary LLC and sits in a reserve account that technically belongs to your operation, but practically has its own withdrawal permissions." He came around the desk to look at the screen properly. He was very close the way he'd been at the Carrington, and he smelled like coffee and something colder, like winter air off Lake Ontario. "How much is in the reserve?" he said. "So far." She pulled up another tab. "Approximately $430,000. But I've only been looking at the equipment leases. I haven't touched the logistics contracts yet." A silence that had weight to it. "How long did this take you?" Voss said. 11 minutes, she said, "but I had coffee." He straightened. She heard something that might have been the breath he let out. "Keep going," he said. She kept going. She came back Tuesday, Wednesday. By Thursday she had her own key card, which she hadn't asked for, and which appeared on her desk Thursday morning in a small envelope with her name on it in handwriting that was surprisingly legible for someone who ran a criminal organization. She didn't think about what that meant. She opened the files and kept going. The full number, when she found it, was just over $900,000. It had been moved in increments small enough to look like rounding errors to anyone who wasn't looking for it, across a period of 2 years and 7 months, through 4 separate accounts, with a patience that was almost impressive if you weren't the person it was being stolen from. She printed the summary sheet. She walked it to Voss's office, which she'd been to twice, and which contained a desk, a credenza, 3 dead plants that no one had watered in what appeared to be several months, and almost no personal objects. She put the sheet on his desk. He read it without sitting down. He read it the way she imagined he read most things, without expression, without any visible internal weather, just absorption. Nguyen, he said. Not a question. The withdrawal permissions were set up under his employee credentials, Nora said. But 2 of the transfers have a timestamp that puts them outside his normal access window. Someone else had his login. He looked up. Or he gave it willingly, Voss said. Or that, she said. I can't tell you which from the numbers. That's outside my scope. What's inside your scope? She set a second sheet beside the first. I can tell you that the reserve account had a beneficiary designation added 14 months ago, a numbered company registered in Winnipeg. She paused. I can also tell you that numbered company shares a registered agent with another company that appears in your own secondary LLC documentation, which means either Nguyen was planning to eventually point the money back at you, or he was being set up, Voss said, or he was being used, Nora said, which isn't the same thing. He was quiet for a moment. The city hummed faintly behind the double-glazed windows. A truck somewhere below. You're not just a bookkeeper, he said. I'm exactly a bookkeeper, Nora said. I just read what the books actually say instead of what people want them to say. He looked at her. That same thing again. The thing she didn't have a word for. The thing that sat somewhere between assessment and something else she wasn't going to name. There's a third company, she said. I need 2 more days. You have them, he said. She turned to go, Callahan. She stopped. The coffee, he said. Is it the right kind? She turned back around. He was looking at the dead plants on his credenza, or at the wall behind them, or at something she couldn't see. It's fine, she said. It's not the right kind, he said. I'll have it changed. She left without answering. In the elevator going down, she stood very still with her bag over her shoulder, and her summary sheets in a folder, and the key card in her coat pocket. And she thought about a man who ran 4 shell companies and 2 LLCs, and an operation that moved close to $1 million in revenue every month, and had, apparently, noticed that she drank her coffee black and decided that was still somehow wrong. She thought about her father's name on a document she hadn't seen. She thought about the card on the table at the Carrington, and how she'd put it in her pocket before she'd consciously decided to. The elevator opened. She walked out into the lobby and through the glass doors onto King Street, and the November wind came off the lake and hit her square in the face, cold and honest and Lake Ontario specific, the kind of cold that didn't apologize for itself. She had 2 more days. She went back upstairs. The third company took her a day and a half. It was cleaner than the others. Better constructed, less hasty, the kind of structure you built when you'd had time to think. It routed through a real estate holding in Oakville, of all places, a commercial property that appeared entirely legitimate on paper, and almost certainly was, except for a management fee that got paid to a company registered to an address in Montreal that, when she searched the address, was a UPS store. The management fee was $42,000 a month. She sat with that for a while. She pulled the original employment contract for Nguyen. She pulled the org chart, which Voss's assistant had sent her without comment when she'd asked. She pulled every email she'd been given access to, which was more than she'd expected, and probably more than Voss had fully registered he'd given her. She found the thread on a Friday morning, the light coming grey and flat through the office windows, her third coffee sitting cold beside the keyboard. It was a reply chain, 9 months old, between 2 addresses she didn't recognize on a server that wasn't the company's. Someone had forwarded it to the company account. Nguyen's company account as documentation. A paper trail left deliberately, or accidentally, or as a kind of insurance. She read it twice. Then she printed it, and the summary, and the third company documentation, and she walked to Voss's office without knocking, which she had never done before. He was on the phone. He looked up. She set the papers on his desk. He ended the call. He looked at the papers. She watched his face. She'd gotten reasonably good, over the past 2 weeks, at reading the very small amount of information his face gave out. A slight stillness in the jaw meant he was recalculating something. A particular quality of attention in his eyes meant he'd found what he was looking for. He found it. He set the papers down. He was quiet for a moment that stretched. "My brother-in-law," he said, not to her. "To the room mostly." The registered agent for the Winnipeg company, she said, and the forwarded thread is him directing the account setup. Nguyen didn't plan it. He was recruited. Recruited, Voss said, like the word tasted of something he hadn't expected. Nguyen's daughter has a medical condition, Nora said. Expensive one. I found the hospital billing documentation in his personal expense claims. He'd been submitting it incorrectly, which is how I found it. Someone knew. And someone offered a solution that looked like loyalty and was actually a leash. The room was very quiet. Voss stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at King Street and the November sky above it, which was the particular grey of a Toronto November that had given up trying to be anything else. Nguyen didn't know the money was being redirected to him, Nora said. He thought he was building a fund for his daughter. He didn't know the Winnipeg company was pointed back at your accounts. She paused. Your brother-in-law was going to use it as evidence of theft, at a moment of his choosing. Voss didn't turn around. How certain are you? He said. The numbers are certain, she said. What people intended, that's always interpretation. But the structure of this doesn't make sense any other way. A long moment. What does it cost, he said, to make the daughter's bills go away permanently? It wasn't a question, really. It was him thinking out loud in a room where he'd apparently decided she was allowed to hear him do that. I don't know, she said, but I can find out what the ongoing treatment costs if you give me the condition and the clinic. He turned around. He looked at her for a moment that felt different from the other times. Not the assessment look. Something quieter. You've been here 2 weeks, he said. 11 working days, she said. And you found $900,000 in misdirected funds, identified a source I didn't anticipate, and are now asking me for a pediatric medical billing summary. You said you wanted to know what the books actually said. I didn't know the books said that, he said. They usually say more than people expect, Nora said. If you know what to look for. He was quiet again. This was something she'd gotten used to. The way his silences weren't uncomfortable, exactly, just heavy, weighted, like he was loading them with something he hadn't yet decided to put into words. My brother-in-law is at a conference in Vancouver until Tuesday, he said. I know, she said. I found his travel expense claim in the shared drive. Something moved across his face, definitely not a smile, definitely adjacent to one. Callahan, he said. Yes. The dead plants, he said. Do you know anything about plants? She looked at the credenza. 3 succulents, 2 small ferns, all of them past the point of being described as struggling. The ferns are gone, she said. The succulents you might save if someone waters them. They don't need much. I don't need much, he said. It came out quietly, and she wasn't sure he'd meant to say it out loud. She looked at him. He looked at the succulents. Outside, the November light was doing its flat Toronto thing, turning everything the color of something that was almost okay. She picked up one of the succulents and set it on the windowsill where it would get the most of whatever light there was. She didn't explain why. She picked up her folder. I'll have the medical billing summary by Monday, she said. She walked out. In the elevator, on the way down, she thought about $900,000 and a medical leash and a man who'd looked at a dead plant the way people look at things they've stopped expecting to survive. She thought about her father's debt. She thought about the fact that she'd moved the succulent without asking, and he hadn't said anything, and that felt, somehow, like the most significant financial transaction of the past 2 weeks. The elevator opened. She walked back out onto King Street into the grey November air. She had a medical summary to find. She had a key card in her pocket. She had, she realized, somewhere between the seating chart at the Carrington and the dead plants on the 14th floor, become the person who kept the books for the most dangerous man in the city, and the books, as far as she could tell, were finally starting to balance.